Good morning, Imagine.
I was about to say that. I just said I'm about to do the intro. And she said, ask me a question if I'm not saying anything in 2 seconds in.
Good morning. Oh, it's been a while since we've done this together. All right. Good morning, Imagine. And happy Sunday. And today is a special Sunday because today is Imagine's 8th birthday.
Oh, I forgot about that when we first started filming.
Yes, 8 years.
8-year anniversary of Imagine.
Today.
And so what we wanted to do today as we celebrate our 8th year anniversary is for the people who tune in live on Sunday mornings, for the people who follow up on video, you are the first ones who are going to get really the first major update from Imagine in a long time since, COVID first hit and we've kind of been finding our way through. So here's 4 things we want to talk about today. We want to talk about where we were before COVID. We want to talk about what we went through as a church. I'm sure we'll talk about broader things, but for us as a church specifically, we want to talk about how we responded to that. And then we want to end by talking about where we're at and where we're going. So where we were, 2020, January, February, March, we were in, for Imagine, like we were in the 6th or 7th year at the time. I think we were in the middle of the 7th year. And our church was arguably, because people might have different views, but our church was arguably in one of the healthiest, most vibrant, most exciting, most hope-filled, most beautiful times of the church. We had just made this major transition from Bevy to the Sandbox. All kinds of new space, all kinds of new people, new initiatives that were coming. It was those transitions, any transition like that is challenging. And that transition for us as a church went amazing. Like everything we hoped it would be, it was.
Looking back, it's kind of like, not to say that it was too good to be true, but when I hear you share that story and as we remember, and seriously, how special is that we're remembering and sharing and also imagining what is to come on Imagine's 8th year anniversary is also special. But I think back and it's true. It was scary leaving Bevy. There was a lot of uncertainty. There were a lot of risks that we decided to make and to leap towards. We trusted that God was doing something new, and indeed He did. Besides everything that Kevin's talking about, I think one of the most exciting things, there was a lot, but one of the most exciting things for me when we moved to the Sandbox as a mother myself was being able to see a space finally present for our families to experience together, growing with one another while growing and connecting to God. And so I would say...
Which basically means there was finally a space for kids that wasn't DIY, put your kids on the ground of a back of a bar.
True.
It's a step up from there. You didn't have to step too high up to get past that.
But
it was a good step up.
We had our own.
It was like 7 steps up from there. It was 7 steps up.
And it was not just our own room, but there was a lot of things that went into it. And I think about how from actually the beginning days of Imagine to where we last were at the Sandbox, that was the most exciting time for families.
Yeah, and when we look back, like so many people who grieve what was, so many churches, so many small businesses. For us, when we think about COVID, it's like we were in this amazing, exciting place. And for some of you, it was 2 years in the making. For some of you, it was 5 years. For some of you, it was 1 year. But for us, that was 7 years in the making. We moved back here at 28, and you give 7 years of your life to something, and then to see where it's at and with a whole new beginning. And it just got taken away. Us, along with countless others, lost and had to let go of a great thing. So
yeah, excuse me while
that choked me up.
Yeah,
I mean, sometimes if I let myself if I need to like feel a little melancholy for a day during COVID, I would scroll through Imagine's Instagram and look at old photos of seasons and look at old photos of the sandbox. And it was almost like, you know, Victor Hugo says melancholy is the happiness of being sad. And I would let myself do that. I was like, I would be happy for what it was, but I would also be sad because of the fact that it was gone. And yeah, where we were. Now, what we went through as a church, right? It's a global thing, but let's talk specifically about Imagine. What we went through as we transitioned to COVID was, one, the loss and the death of that season. The loss and the death of what was. Did you want to say something?
So you saw that gentle, oh wait, I want to say something. And even, I think another layer to that loss was also this layer of trauma. There was this suddenness of something being taken away, this sense of familiarity, this sense of comfort, of home. You know, church, for Imagine, it's about home. It's about community. It's about being with each other while journeying closer to the Lord in this beautiful journey of life. And I think as Kevin's talking about this death, this loss, there's also that layer of trauma, of this, it happened so fast. I mean, I think human beings don't realize, you Imagine Church along with us, truly how resilient we are. I think that human beings have such a resilient spirit within. And if it's one thing, we look back during the pandemic and we see truly how adaptable we are, forced in situations where we have no other say. It's kind of like you shut down or you pivot and you make moves. And there were a lot of changes that came into place that were beyond our control, following the health and the safety guidelines and having to make these decisions of, wait, we can't go back there, so what are we going to do? So I think that as we grieve the loss, maybe some of us hasn't even taken into consideration, what we experience, which I appreciate.
Well, it's real grief. It's like when you say you grieve and let go of something, that's not a simple process. It's a real death, which
affects you.
Can be a traumatic thing, can stick around for too long. And when you first transition, if we're spending this time updating, I'm gonna keep it real and be honest. Are you gonna keep it real and be honest?
I already did. They already saw it. I think. Well, now we're 7 minutes in. I think the tears came at 5 minutes in.
Here's kind of like a little, you see what happens for Imagine in COVID. One, you transition, it's hard, it's crazy, you're going to a digital platform.
Yeah.
Those first few weeks of COVID were so hard. You make plans, they don't work. We're going back in 3 weeks, now it's 3 months. Now people are like, we won't be meeting till the end of the year. You're like, there's no way that's possible. It's been 16 months later. Like, it's a crazy time. And in the beginning, when you transition, people are engaged, right? There's
an excitement.
Yeah, there's an excitement. It's more of a novelty of like, we're online together at least.
Yeah.
And it's cool.
At least.
And people are sending hey, we want to send in this reading. Remember those days when people would send in readings and videos and we're all like, ooh, this is awesome. And as a church, we did our best to keep people engaged, for people to see each other, to do what we could in the beginning for small businesses when it was more of like, this is going to hit us just for a little bit, not knowing it would be so long. So there's that initial novelty of it. And then there's, the George Floyd murder, the uprising that was taking place end of May, I think early June, maybe it wasn't the end of May. And there was a lot of energy around that. Our church was definitely active and, talking about that and leading our way through it and standing up for justice during that time. And there was energy in the church around that because it was such a COVID and the uprising. It was a wild time. And then after a while, for the church as a whole and for a lot of individuals, the Zoom fatigue sets in. And let's be honest, after a while, Zoom just sucks. It does. It's good for what it is, but when that's all you have for so long, it's hard. How many people are like, I can't get on another Zoom call. I can't do this again. And for those of you who stayed connected and kept doing it and still do, that's amazing. Like, I really am so amazed by people who stayed committed to community through Zoom. But after a while, it's just people are struggling, people are disengaging, people are pulling back. Less and less people are tuning in on Sundays, less and less people are part of Zooms, less and less people are part of Instagram Lives. Remember when Instagram Lives used to be a thing? Now I'm like, why are people still doing this? And we know people were doing their best to survive.
Yeah.
If there was any kind of trauma, if there was real grief, if there was so much uncertainty, everybody had to just find their way through the dark with like holding one match on the way. You know, it's like that's all we could feel from God sometimes. It's not even a lantern for the next steps, it's a match for the next 5 feet, you know, and it could feel like survival. And that's
not just even within the church, but like you're mentioning, it's also realizing the survival in our individual journey. So we're not just surviving to, okay, what do we do with Imagine as far as adapting, pivoting, and transitioning? But we were all going through that in our own individual lives. So people on worship, or our other pastors, our other leaders, our other volunteers, like everyone was surviving to get through the day, to sustain our sanity and maintain, physical, mental, and spiritual wholeness, right?
Yeah.
During that time, there was a saying that goes, surviving was the thriving. So to be thriving meant, you made it through the day and you're okay.
Yeah, and one of the ways we responded when you look at worship was we kept scaling back Sundays. Because we didn't want to burn people out. We you know how hard it is as a leader to keep asking people to commit time and energy and sacrifice when I know so many people are drowning. So many people are struggling with mental health issues. So many people are moving to isolation, or moving to anxiety. Like, we have to, like, after a while, it's like no one's sending in videos like, hey, you want to read this psalm this week? And it's like you send out 20 text messages and no one responds. It's like, all right, cool.
And I'll be honest, I mean, we've always have been, come on, when you asked that earlier, are we going to be honest? We have always been a community that stood for honesty and transparency. And if that was our desire and our prayer and our hope for the church, then we had to model it and show that it was safe to be able to be in process. For all of you who do know me, you guys know I'm an Enneagram 2. So I'm the deep feeler, right? The feeler, I want to help. And oh man, texting. So for all of those people who've received text in worship and those who have sent in readings from myself, like, those were hard, I don't want to burden you. And like Kevin said, after the 15th time when you don't hear something, it was also this tension of, how do you call people to something but also respect, discern? I think that's important to highlight as well, where we were constantly praying through, discerning through, dialoguing through.
Where it's like, Christine would be like, let's do a new song for this week. And I'd be like, why? Like, at this point in the journey, 9-10 months in, a year in, January 2021, after so many people who aren't, and many people were for the worship crew,
wow,
everybody who has sung, played an instrument during this time, your words, your voices, your presence has helped carry Imagine through this time. And we're so grateful for that. But we would have to wrestle with that tension of people don't want to do readings. They're over. People are over Zoom. So we're like, let's stop. Our discernment was like, let's scale back. We can't keep asking people to do this. Let's just let people be, keep showing up with what we have in a simple way. And, we did our best in simple ways to sustain living rooms for all the living room leaders, who, especially Larry and Chanel and people who held that down. Larry starting a new group, Larry, really, for people who know him, he in many ways carried Imagine through this season, even more so than I did at times, and I'm so grateful to have him as a friend and as a brother and as a pastor in this church. And, we did our best to sustain living rooms in simple ways, maintain Sundays as an ongoing kind of check-in and touch point for the community. But we did get to a point where we have to resist the urge to just keep doing a bunch of stuff to stay busy and convince ourselves as leaders we're doing enough. And along the way, as you see less and less engagement in living on everything, to be honest, and as you see less and less viewers and watchers and people tuning in on Sunday, there was no judgment on my end. You know, I'm always so amazed and in awe of the people who keep showing up, but I know not everyone's going to keep doing that, and there was only so much we could do without jeopardizing people's health because of COVID and knowing everyone's just over, not everyone, but like people are over Zoom. And we had to, along the way, let the old version of Imagine die. We had to entrust our church to God, knowing Christ is the head of the church and not us. That doesn't mean we gave up. Of course, we did this imperfectly the past 16 months, but it doesn't mean we gave up. It just meant let's keep it as simple and minimal as possible during this time, and open and let everything die and do all of our own internal work of acceptance. And we sensed there would be a time to prepare ourselves for Imagine to be born again and for a new moment of resurrection. But there's only resurrection when you've actually experienced the fullness of death. There's only new life when you've surrendered the old life. There's only Sunday when you have embraced and come to terms with Friday. And the whole process was like a slow Friday. It's like a slow Good Friday of the passion of Christ, of Jesus going to the cross. Well, it's like the passion of COVID and churches feeling the weight of the world like Christ did on that day, feeling everything bearing down on them. And this really as a whole, and I mentioned this before, was a really traumatic and trying and tragic, I didn't mean for all those to be like an alliteration, I just can't help it as the pastor, time for leaders. Like, do you know how many churches have closed down during COVID? Do you know how many pastors have left their churches? And I have no judgment. Again, people are just trying to survive. Do you know how many people have given up? Do you know how many people have burned out? Do you know how many people have walked away from leading and pastoring? The churches have just died. And it's been, while it was a great season for our family, and we can take on, you don't have to take, I always tell people, like, you don't have to feel bad about being honest about where you're at, you know. And personally, there was great things for our family to be connected, but, you know, leading through this is just one of the most trying, hardest things, because there's no right way to do it. There's a faithful way where, you know, Cornel West says all we're trying to do is love our crooked neighbors with our crooked hearts. And it's like all we're trying to do is lead a crooked community as crooked leaders, you know, not in the criminal sense. And you just have to do that the best you can and come to terms along the way when you're like, we're failing at this part. This is really hard. We don't have a vision for this. We had a vision and now it just got stripped again. Like, how do we keep doing this week to week, month to month, etc.? And that was how we responded. Do you want to say anything about that, how we responded that season before we go to where we're at?
Well, it's interesting as Kev's sharing all this, I'm just sitting here being present and remembering, you know, words evoke memory and take him back to that place. And I mean, I could tell you this, there was no literature that was going down during this time because we were all living it. It wasn't like there were people ahead of us that were going to write something, you know, or give a TED talk, so to speak, or a 5-point message on how to survive a global pandemic. But you know, it's interesting as Kevin's sharing this tough time that we all experienced together collectively, every time that Kevin and I were in our moments of silence, which is far and few in between raising 2 toddlers, but when they would finally go down, or even during the day, and we'd be able to have our moment in quiet and in peace, the thing that kept, you know, repeating itself and echoing itself was this sense from God saying, it's gonna be okay. Like, it's gonna be okay. It being the community, it being the church, it being us, it was trusting that everything that we were doing and everything that you were doing was enough, and allowing the process to unfold and trusting that, again, if we are going to be the ones proclaiming resurrection for Christ's life, And the resurrection is also the same in our story and allowing that death to unfold. But it's hard when you are confronted, going toe to toe and face to face with death. Those of you who've experienced loss with a loved one, it's hard. It's really hard. And so that was the tragic nature of that. But through it all, it was, at the end of the day, faithfulness. Our faithfulness was more than enough. And so when you say, is there anything that you want to say as you remember that, as we're on the verge of sharing, what is to come, I would say that it was a tough time. There's no getting around it. There's no fancy, cheesy quotes that can put a Band-Aid to it. It was tough. It was hard. It was a battle. It was an uphill. It was muddy. It was icky. It was funky. There would be moments of rest, but nevertheless, it was tough. And in that toughness, there's this new pocket of space that we're beginning to feel.
Well, we talked about where we were, what we went through, how we responded. Obviously, none of this is exhaustive. We're just talking a little bit about each one for the sake of retelling the story of how we get to where we are now and where we're at with Imagine. We sense and know, not with certainty, but know in the deep kind of heart knowing with God kind of a way, that the time is coming for Imagine to be born again. We feel that we are on the edge of a new season. We feel we are tiptoeing along the final steps of the death of the old and are getting ready to cross over a threshold into a new season of resurrection. So just recently, with just the kind of a small group of core leaders from our church, we decided no matter what tier we're in, no matter what happens with cases, September is the time for Imagine to start meeting again in person. It was like, okay, we're going to move to tier 5, which we actually just did, on Oahu. And then they had hopes, to get the level of vaccination where it needed to be to drop all restrictions in September. Who knows if that'll happen. But we said we think it's time, no matter what happens with all of that, to make the decision to move forward and start meeting again in person for worship on Sundays. And not too long after that, right before I went on my trip to New York, the people from the Sandbox reached out to me. I didn't reach out to them. They reached out to me, and the person said, Kevin, we just want to they gave me some details, but they're like, we're about to change our system in the sense of where they're going to start charging more money for rent and they're going to change how they do it. And they said, but we wanted to reach out to you to let you know that if your church wants to keep meeting here, we will honor the old price and the old deal that we had before all of this. So we're going to move forward for the public. That was my elbow hitting the wall. We're going to move forward with the public like this, but we want to maintain the way things were before. So not too long after we're sensing, let's take this new risk, let's step into this new moment of faith, let's cross over this new threshold, let's leap into the unknown once again, let's dare to believe that this whole thing can be born again. Not too long after, the people from the space reach out to me and then basically invite Imagine back and are saying they want to make a way for us. Perhaps those are the fingerprints of the Spirit whose hands are still shaping and molding our church. It is time. It is time for Imagine to be born again. We are not going back to the way it was. We are moving forward and allowing God to recreate it into what it's going to be. The theologian Walter Brueggemann says, only grief permits newness. And we've accepted the grief. We've died to the way it was. I've wept over it and I've just had so many alone times as a leader, like my melancholy scrolling when no one's around. But I never shut down my heart. I never gave up. I never I was like, there's gonna be another time. There's going to be the Spirit of God always needs form. And the old form of Imagine has died. But it's the same spirit and the same heart of Imagine just needs a new body. And we are going to come out of the grave of COVID and be born with this new body, the same heart, the same spirit, but a new body that will take those steps as a part of our place in the body of Christ and move forward into an entirely new season. There is a new chapter ahead. The next 2 to 3 years, there's a whole new chapter with a whole new wave of people that's filled with all of these amazing people who are still a part of this. And no matter how hard it's been, no matter how many tears we've shed, no matter how much uncertainty there's been, no matter how much pain that everybody's taken in, for Imagine, this is not the end. I know that. And we are willing, and I am willing, and the leadership's willing, and we hope the people who are still tuning in are willing to give their lives again to let God move us into this new season of resurrection where we can all collectively together be born again. And I am just, there's something so special about the unknowing and the unfolding mystery of what is this going to look like at Christmas this year. At Christmas, what will we look back to now and what we did for the next 4 or 5 months, how God worked? What will it look like next summer? I don't know, but I'm willing to throw my life, throw my energy onto the line to see that happen again. And I'm inviting all of you to do the same as well.
Beautiful. I don't got any quotes from theologians, but I could tell you personal accounts of stories. And that's to say, there's a couple things that I wanted to mention before we end is during this tough time when I would see, and as the tears would begin to open up, though we were not meeting in person and we were meeting virtually, socially distanced and all, whether it be our drive-ins and online, when I would see people at Imagine gather, friends who've known each other from Bevy days or Agora days, or even new people meeting online and somehow connecting and allowing friendship to form. When I would see that, I would always be moved by tears, because to me, that's what the church is all about. Imagine has always been church beyond walls. It's about people coming together, embodying the image of God that's within one, collectively forming together, that just shines so bright who God is in the fullest form. And so I just wanted to say, for those of you who've been part of Imagine or near to Imagine and have stayed connected, would you know that your love and your presence has shined so bright during the darkest days, that has been so inspiring for Kevin and I to see. And I think about how, when Kevin's talking about what is Imagine going to look like, what is Imagine going to be when we come again, because it's just so beyond what we've known it to be. We've never had, it's really felt like a long distance relationship, truly. This COVID time has...
Which I suck at, by the way. I'm terrible at.
It's been, there was a season of our relationship where we did long distance, and it was the hardest part of our relationship. But I look back, and I will tell you confidently that it was during that year break that we had from each other.
She's talking about us now, but...
Oh yeah, us now. I, as hard as it was, I wouldn't trade it for the world, because it definitely made us to be the people that we were. Everything that we had to confront allowed us to be stronger. And I think about this break in our church, to be confronted with every insecurity and every hard feeling and still showing up. I want you to know how resilient and how truly your love for God and your love for others is an expression of the good news. That was a quick tangent. What I wanted to say is, when Kevin and I wonder what is Imagine going to be when we reunite and come together again, I think so much of the life of Jesus. And I think about after Good Friday, that long Good Friday that we've been in, but after that Good Friday, I think about how he wasn't found. He wasn't found in the place that people thought they would come find him. He was not there. And he actually was different. It was a different form of Jesus that they once knew, but there were still the scars on his hand that reminded the people of who he was, though he looked and was different. And I think about Imagine. And I think about how there are many people, even us, it's been us during moments where we've wondered what's going to happen after this death. Yes, we trust in resurrection, but on a flesh level, like truly what's going to happen? What's
Also,
to
nobody
come?
knows with certainty.
Right, what's to come? And I find so much comfort when I think back to the story of Jesus. And I think about that story, how Imagine will be different. How because we make up Imagine, how we will be different. And there might be moments where we might not even recognize each other physically or even just emotionally and mentally, and just how we've grown up and who we are. And the scars of shame and the scars of doubt and whatever it was that we battled through, it will not be a badge and a scar of shame, but rather it is a reminder of honor and the resilience of what we lived through, what we survived, and who we are today. And that is exciting to be able to see and to celebrate. And so Imagine Church, when Kevin talks about pain, I think about going through labor. You see, now I haven't spoken for so long, and then I'm feeling like I'm going to go on a rabbit trail. I'll end it with this. Giving birth is one of the most painful things, and that pain allowed for new life to form. I think collectively, there is this pain that is pushing forth new life. And Imagine Church, I am excited, I am expectant, and I'm looking forward to the time where we get to gather again in the fall. And I want to encourage you, Imagine Church, to keep showing up and to know that truly the best is yet to come.
So there will be more communication, visually, digital, all of that leading up to September. We will be doing that from now until then. This is just our first word on this to the faithful people who have been still tuning in. So there is more information, more clarity, more readiness to come, and it's time to be born again and to embrace the mystery of this new form and this new body God will create us into. So Imagine Church, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may he turn his face towards you and give you peace.
And the people of Imagine says, Amen. Happy birthday, Imagine.